again. Mass bloodshed, this time on the border, with every indication a gunman was driven by racial and political hate. As El Paso grieves, what now, America? On the national stage, Democrats divided as some call for the end of criminal consequence for those who enter our country without permission. Will the proposal catch fire or cripple the progressive cause in 2020? And at the state capitol, a scandal deepens for the Texas House Speaker. Will a secret recording be the downfall of Republican Dennis Bonnen? I'm Greg Rugen, and welcome to What's Your Point, where our panelists call it like they see it. Let's greet them. Starting us off, 1/3 of the amigos on KSEV radio, Republican Ben Strusand. Next up, Mary Moreno, communication chief for the Texas Organizing Project. In the 3 spot, Bob Price, associate editor of Breitbart, Texas. Batting cleanup, Democratic consultant and longtime Fox 26 contributor, MUSTAFA TAMEEZ. Next up, Charles Blaine of the advocacy group Urban Reform. And closing us out on the hot corner, writer, educator, and radio host Antonio Diaz. Let's begin. By now you have seen the pictures and heard the body count. 20 dead and 24 more wounded in El Paso. According to investigators, a 21-year-old Caucasian man attacked a crowded Walmart with a rifle equipped with high-capacity magazines, looking to kill or maim as many people as possible. Police also say the gunman posted a manifesto justifying his attack as a response to an, quote, Hispanic invasion of Texas and what he described as cultural and ethnic replacement. The murderer, Patrick Crusius of Allen, Texas, is in custody. As his grieving community prepares to bury the innocent, Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke pointed a finger of blame.
We've had a rise in hate crimes every single one of the last 3 years. During an administration where you have a president who's called Mexicans rapists and criminals, though Mexican immigrants commit crimes at a far lower rate than those born here in the country, he has tried to make us afraid of them to some real effect and consequence. Attempting to ban all Muslims from this country. The day that he signed that executive order, the mosque in Victoria, Texas was burned to the ground. Those chants that we heard in Greenville, North Carolina, send her back, talking about our fellow American citizens duly elected to represent their constituents in the Congress who happen to be women of color. He is a racist.
Vegas, Orlando, Parkland, Sutherland Springs, Santa Fe, and now El Paso. Just in the 3 years this program has been on the air. This morning we are reporting another mass shooting in Dayton, Ohio. At least 10 are dead. We have a sickness, folks, and it's not getting better. With that, I'm going to turn to Bob Price, who's been reporting on this El Paso shooting. Brandon Darby, who you work with closely, says let's call it what it is: white supremacist terrorism.
That's absolutely correct, and I praise Brandon for having the courage to make that statement. He took a lot of flack for it. Lana Shadwick and I covered this story yesterday for about 9 to 10 hours, and the scene is horrific. And clearly, if this manifesto is in fact from the shooter, which they're still investigating to make that connection, it was racially motivated, it was hate, and there's no tolerance for that in this country. We need to stop that. But there's a lot of hate that comes from both sides. Just 3 weeks ago, another domestic terrorist tried to blow up an ICE facility in Tacoma, Washington, and had he been successful with exploding that propane tank, he would have killed hundreds of people, including the migrants he was supposedly there to protect. So we need to dial back the rhetoric on here and talk about things that will actually make sense and make a difference.
Tony, emotional time for you. This is on the border. This was aimed at Hispanic people.
Right, and I am trying to maybe provide healing, because it is upsetting, it's offensive, it's sad, it's heartbreaking. I read the screed attributed to the shooter, and I mean, at some point, some people are going to doubt if it's his or not. Regardless of if it's his or not, it's that sort of information floating around that is creating these racist views. His manifesto cites this ideology from this literature that white supremacists are following. Unfortunately, other people, like even Steve Bannon, has quoted that same literature. It's infiltrated through the system. But in this manifesto, he basically says that he came to keep the invasion of Hispanics at bay. He says that he was he didn't want to shoot Americans. He would shoot immigrants. And then additionally, he said that he was propelled by the Democratic debates, where they talked about, and he cites all these different cliches and stereotypes, as in open borders, waves of immigrants. Worse, he basically says that Hispanic children are stealing the American dream. I can't help but wonder that, Julian Castro on that stage may have really driven this guy over the edge, and that's really sad.
Okay, Ben Strusan, I know you're troubled by this. Your thoughts?
Well, we're here, we all are Americans, we all are Texans, but we all represent, I think, sort of the cross-section of America to the extent that Hispanics have been targeted, African Americans have been targeted, people of Middle East and Asian descent, Jews have been targeted, Christians have been targeted. So I don't think that it is necessary or wise to fracture up the victims, where we've all victims deserve, I think, the same sympathy and just absolute revulsion I think we all feel on these senseless attacks. It's murder. It's not American. It's not Texan at all. We just don't believe in this. And as to what to do about it in terms of public policy, I'm always careful not to engage in a lot of public policy debate until we know all the facts, until all the facts come out. But unfortunately, we're in the middle of a presidential campaign, and so you see people like Beto that cross over like that occasionally, and we're forced to respond to it.
Mary, what can you say about this?
That we're not talking about guns, right? That's one thing all of these shootings have in common. You can't shoot people without guns. And there's been, even in Dayton, Ohio today, yesterday in El Paso, Sutherland Springs, Parkland, that's one thing they have in common. And we have to do something about guns. We can't love our guns more than we love our human beings.
Charles Blaine, take it up.
Yeah, I mean, schools, concerts, nightclubs, now Walmart, it just seems to never end. And after these things, we always hear people pointing blame, whether it's to public policy or to elected officials, but we don't hear kind of a robust conversation about, I think, the underlying issue, which is mental health. I mean, I'm not going to pretend to know the shooter's mental health history, but the fact is that if you are going to write a manifesto like that, if you're going to carry out these actions, you have significant problems that need to be addressed. And I don't think we talk about that enough, especially men in this country. I don't think they talk about mental health issues enough. And I think that needs to be more included in the conversation. I mean, people like this need to seek help when they're feeling certain ways, when they're having bad thoughts. I mean, whether we remove guns or not, things are going to happen. People who want to hurt people, one of my favorite radio hosts often says, hurt people, and they're going to find a way to do that regardless of what weapon that is. And I think we need to have a more open and honest dialogue about mental health in this country and what we need to do to begin to repair and begin to heal so that we don't continue to see these things.
Mustafa, what will it take to reach a tipping point in this country?
Well, I'm hoping today. There are no moral equivalents when it comes to violence. I think it's easy to say, look, everybody's being targeted, so there's nothing going on here other than just mental health issues, or there's nothing going on here other than the fact that we've got a gun epidemic. But something is going on. We have a population that is radicalizing. We've seen that. We understand this. This is not something that's new to us, right? We've seen it in other faiths. We've seen it in other communities. We've seen it around the world. And extremism is on the rise. And right now it's on the rise amongst young men who are white, who feel vulnerable for some, have a sense of shared grievance. They see it from those that they hold in high office and those that they admire. And when those individuals begin to tell them that they're some kind of a dying breed, that they're sometimes attacked, they're attacking back. And so we need people to not use moral equivalent language, but just to clearly say, emphatically say, that this is wrong and that you're not one of us when you do this.
Button us up on this, Bob. Last 20 seconds.
Okay, we've got a lot of talk about gun control and taking guns away from people. Currently, we don't enforce the laws that are on the books. We don't prosecute people who lie to illegally buy firearms. We don't report felons to the NICS system where the background checks can stop them from getting guns. We don't report people who get domestic violence protection orders against them, which prohibit them from even possessing a gun. We don't report a lot of things that could prevent the actual types of people getting a hold of these guns.
We got to do something, and we got to leave it there. When we come back, ending criminal charges for those who enter America without permission. Will Democrat Julian Castro's proposal help or hurt Democrats? Plus, Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo joins us at the bottom of the hour. Stay with us. Welcome back. A full score of Democrats seeking the presidency congregated on a debate stage in Detroit in the second Hunger Games style competition for the party's nomination. While the designation of winners and losers in the two-day clash is clearly a matter of opinion, one issue emerged with the capacity to cleave the field into factions. It was generated by Texan and former San Antonio Mayor Julian Castro, who in an exchange with frontrunner Joe Biden proposed the complete decriminalization of undocumented border crossings.
What do you say to all those people around the world who, in fact, want the same thing to come to the United States and make their case, but they don't, that they have to wait in line? The fact of the matter is, you should be able to, if you cross the border illegally, you should be able to be sent back. It's a crime. It's a crime, and it's not one that, in fact...
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Secretary Castro, please.
Yeah. First of all, Mr. Vice President, it looks like one of us has learned the lessons of the past and one of us hasn't.
Castro went on to say the criminal statute against illegal entry should be repealed and accountability should be a civil action. So there you have it, a major presidential candidate proposing what many see as an open border. Tony, I'm going to turn to you on this because you have strong feelings.
I do. I feel like the phrase open borders is a stereotype. No Democrat has actually claimed that as a position. It's not a position. And in fact, let's get real. That cliche was brought up by the shooter's manifesto in El Paso. And that is not a useful term if we're going to have a serious dialogue about immigration. Castro had a great performance. I think he was really smart, and he's coming up with something really intelligent about immigration. It's still a civil offense. You still get consequences, which he mentioned. There's still a process for amnesty. And if you're a drug runner or a gang member, you run afoul of other laws. So I'm impressed that he's bringing up these issues. He brought up decriminalizing this crossing of the border so that you don't separate families. And Republicans keep saying that that's what Obama did. Obama did not enforce it that way and separate families to the like that Trump is doing.
As I often do, I follow you with Bob Price. Do you think that this is an open border policy if you decriminalize?
I'm going to agree with Tony a little bit, and I'm going to disagree with him quite a bit. I don't think the term open borders is an accurate phrase. We quit using that term a long time ago on Breitbart News. The truth is the border is unsecured. The border is not secure. You have wide open spaces where anyone can cross. We've got people from over 65 different countries crossing the border illegally into the United States. The people are not coming here to request asylum. The UN says if you're going to request asylum, you do it in the first safe country you come to after you leave your country. That's not what's happening. This is economic migration to the United States, and it needs to be treated appropriately.
Okay, Mustafa, I want to ask you, brass tacks, is this a winning issue for Democrats in 2020?
First, I was choked up when Bob said he agreed with Tony, and then he said, but. Okay. Look, I think that you have 20 people running for the president of the United States on the Democratic side. You have Vice President Biden, who's polling the highest at the center, and you have lots of candidates in a gradation to the left of him. On the Republican side, the presumptive nominee, President of the United States, Donald Trump, is to the right of the right. If you don't believe me, look at his tweets, look at what people are saying in the rallies. The Republican Party is at an extreme now, and the Democratic Party is at the center of American politics, having debates about important issues and bringing up important ideas. And the American public is going to have to decide, do they want what's in Donald Trump's rallies and what comes out of his mouth? Because if he was a CEO, he would be fired. If he was an athlete, he would be fired. If he was a teacher, he would be fired.
Okay, Ben Strusand.
Yeah,
the Democrats at the center?
Well, I'm not going to get involved in this nomenclature debate, but I will essentially reiterate what I perceive as the Democratic position. Everybody comes, everybody gets to stay, everybody gets health care, nobody has to go home, nobody gets deported. That's pretty much where they've ended up in the bulk of the Democratic Party, with pushback from Joe Biden, because he realizes that Americans are not ready for that radical immigration alternative. And you see, the debates did a great service for America, because now the American people see what the position of the Democratic Party is. They all used to pay some lip service to border security, but this is their platform. And when they object to deporting individuals who have had 2 years, had their due process, and have been ordered home and deported by an immigration judge, but they refuse to comply, when the bulk of the Democratic Party opposes that, you can see what they want. Basically, it's a no-barrier immigration policy.
Mary, you have a rebuttal?
Yes. Well, Americans have a choice to make, right? We all felt really heartbroken when we saw children being torn away from mothers, families separated. Well, this statute that Julian Castro wants to repeal is the underpinnings for that, right? That was the basis that allowed Trump to do all these family separations and hold babies in jails and hold parents in jails. And unless we get rid of this statute, it's going to keep happening. And there still will be a process for deportations, for border security. It's apart from that, right? But how do we treat people who come to this country? Do we treat them as criminals, or do we treat them as people who are taking a life-saving action, right? That is a survival action, and we shouldn't criminalize people who are just trying to survive.
Got to leave it right there. Up next, another Republican congressman from Texas calls it quits. We will explore the impact of Will Hurd's retirement on the 2020 election. Stick around. Welcome back. More troubling news for the Texas GOP. Republican Congressman Will Hurd announced he will not seek re-election, prompting Democrats to claim he was essentially surrendering the seat to the Progressive Party. Hurd becomes the third Texas Republican in recent days to announce retirement, the others being Mike Conaway of Midland and, of course, Pete Olson of Sugar Land. Bottom line, if Republicans hope to recapture the House, the ground necessary is unlikely to be gained in Texas. What do you think of that, Charles?
I mean, listen, I think retirements, they're inevitable, they're expected. Hurd has had tough re-elections, so I think this is a little shocking just because we've seen this succession of people saying they're not going to run for office in both Congress and the Texas House, Republicans here in Texas. I think there's some good candidates throwing their names in the ring, and I think that Republicans know that this is a district that's going to be tough, but one that's necessary to keep. And so they're going to put a lot of reinforcements in this and try to hold on to it.
MUSTAFA, what does this signal?
I think he's right. Texas Republican retirements are inevitable, some willing and some unwilling in the election. What's going on is that people looking at their polling. They're looking at the polls that just came back, and they know that President Trump is deep underwater. They're not going to win. It's much better to get a job while you've got a job, and that's what they're doing both in the 3 members of Congress, but you're also seeing in the State House. We've got 2 State House members that have already said that they're not going to be running again, and the third one's likely to happen very soon.
Ben, are Republicans losing out to the force of demographics?
Well, I think it makes it harder to win. There's no question about it. But there's going to be so many other factors that play into the outcome. Who controls the House of Representatives? Will the socialist wing of the Democrat Party go all in on impeachment? That's much more likely to be a determinant of who wins the House than individual retirements.
Okay, we're going to leave it right there. Up next, she is the elected leader of 4.7 million people. Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo is here to talk criminal justice reform and offer reaction to the attack in El Paso. Our hot seat conversation is coming up after the break. Welcome back. For Harris County Judge Lina Hidalgo, this Sunday should have been one of continuing celebration. This week, she kept a major campaign promise by pushing through a landmark bail reform settlement designed to end decades of discrimination against low-income defendants. Instead, that accomplishment has been somewhat overwhelmed by an horrific, racially motivated attack on fellow Texans. Judge, as we welcome you back to the hot seat, we ask you for your thoughts and reaction to what happened in El Paso.
An incredible tragedy. Just yesterday I was at a back to school event with children, and to think of the anxiety that children of that same age family shopping at a Walmart now in Dayton, Ohio have to feel going through this kind of thing. It is a cruel outrage. It is unacceptable. I can't believe that any responsible gun owner would think this is okay, and this cannot be the price we pay for a strong Second Amendment. I think it is on all of us, all citizens, all leaders, elected leaders, to act and to bridge the divisiveness that exists right now in our community.
Judge, you live every moment of every day knowing that an attack can and may happen right here in Harris County. In a larger sense, what can we do? What can we teach to reverse what is happening?
First, it's civility. We're at a dangerous place with the kind of conversations that are happening, frankly, on both sides. And we have to remember we are one nation. We are together. We serve everyone. Beyond that, there are clear policy areas. And I can tell you at the county, we're working to explore what we can do. This legislative session, bills passed that make it more difficult for us to put forth common sense reforms, but we are exploring to see what to do. We had our lobbyists up there working against reforms that make our community less safe. We're always ready to advocate, and we all have to be responsible and speak up, because this should not be the price we pay for our status quo.
Judge, you are a proud immigrant citizen. When you read the racially hateful words of the killer in its manifesto, it's got to generate a personal reaction.
The words are not about me. They're more about the fabric of America as a whole. And it could be against immigrants, it could be against Hispanics, it could be against anybody else. The idea is we should not be talking about one another in this way. And that is what this devolves to. But in reality, it goes back to policies about gun safety, it goes back to changes we have to make, and it goes back to the discourse that we should not be having at a national level. We need to be civil, we need to be united, and we need to accept and celebrate our diversity.
Judge, this week you and fellow commissioners approved a landmark settlement, which you have called transformational. I'm talking about the bail system lawsuit settlement. How is Harris County better off now than it was before?
So a few years ago, a federal court judge deemed our bail system so discriminatory it was unconstitutional, and we are now correcting that. So no person will be in jail simply because their wallet is empty, simply because they can't pay, and no person will simply be able to pay their way out of jail because they can afford it, regardless of whether they're a risk to the community. This is about making sure we're spending our taxpayer dollars, our public safety dollars, keeping the most dangerous people out of the community, not locking folks up who are not a safety threat simply because they can't pay. And of course, there is incredible impact from this. When you lock somebody up, not because they're a danger, maybe they trespass, homeless person, somebody with mental illness, somebody who stole an eyeliner, right? You keep them in jail, that person, and studies have shown, is likely to plead guilty, even if they're not. And so that's a problem for the community. They're in jail, so they can't show up to work. They lose their families, they lose their homes. It is just a cascading impact, negative impacts in our community. And so with this landmark settlement, we are stopping that. We are abiding by our Constitution. We are being smart with our taxpayer dollars. We're making our community safer, and we are paving the way for other communities to follow suit.
Judge, one of the critics was Commissioner Cagle, and he fears that the measure doesn't do enough for crime victims. I'm suspecting that you're welcome to doing more for crime victims. Are you concerned it diminishes accountability?
So as far as accountability, it's very interesting. We were very thoughtful about smart policymaking when we designed this. And so it includes, the settlement includes metrics, measurements, transparency, so we can evaluate the progress, and we only enact policies that we know they have data to back them up. As far as victims, this settlement gets at the constitutional violation for people who are accused, which was violating the Constitution of our United States. Of course, throughout the process, all the commissioners were welcome to offer ideas. I'm surprised he didn't offer anything else to go into that consent decree. We are always open to working on other issues that the commissioner sees, and of course he's had a decade to work on whatever issues he sees fit when he's been in office that long.
Before we wrap up, there was recently unanimous consensus on the court regarding a very critical issue, speeding up the rate of flood prevention and protection projects countywide. It seems like a no-brainer, but why was the acceleration worth some additional cost?
We've been trying to figure out what we can do to improve our resilience to flooding, and one of the goals is speeding up the work we're doing. And so we have sped up 87 projects in 105 neighborhoods that flooded during Harvey but were outside the floodplain. So they flooded because of drainage. We know that outside of the city of Houston, Harris County controls the drainage, getting the water from the streets into the bayous and creeks. And so we were able to speed that up, cut the time by a third, cut out 2 to 3 or 1 to 2 hurricane seasons. And we also enacted the most stringent detention requirements the county has seen.
Judge, it's good to have you here. Hope you'll come back, okay?
Thank you for having me.
Okay. When we come back, our team offers its take on the topic of landmark criminal justice reform in Harris County. Should be a lively discussion, so stay with us. Welcome back. As you just heard, Harris County Commissioners this week approved a landmark bail reform settlement, which many are calling a major victory for civil rights. Bottom line, 85% of low-level defendants will be automatically released, ending what a federal judge has deemed discrimination against the poor, who frequently languished in jail awaiting trial. Additional reforms include more public defenders, extended court hours, and transportation resources, enabling citizens to get to and from hearings. Opponents of the settlement, including Commissioner Jack Cagle, say the deal offers little or nothing to crime victims. I want to start with Mary Moreno. You guys fought hard for this.
Yes, the Texas Organizing Project has been in the fight for almost 4 years. You know, the lawsuit was filed 3 years ago because we do bailouts. We occasionally bail people out. We bailed out mothers who, one mother was in jail for 9 months accused of stealing 2 beers. That doesn't make sense. It's not justice. The county spent more than $20,000 to deprive this woman of her freedom for a crime that cost like $250, right? It didn't make sense. And then her 7 children were without their mother for 9 months. And we bailed out many other people who were in jail for weeks and months. And like the judge said earlier, when people are in jail because they can't afford to get out, they will plead guilty in exchange of their freedom, even if they are not guilty, right? So it really does make justice inaccessible to people just because they're poor.
Bob, Ben, either one of you want to jump in here? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think bail reform is much needed. We've had way too many people who are in jail for up to a year on very minor charges, and then in many cases those charges get dismissed for want of prosecution, as they say, after the person spent a year in jail and lost their jobs. So it's not good, but we also need to make sure we're not letting violent people out onto the streets. We've got to protect the public from violent offenders. And finally, on the issue of, you know, I hate it when I lose a thought in the middle of a track, but it's important to make sure that we're keeping violent criminals in jail. I'll end it with that. Okay,
Ben, is there danger of spillover here to that separate category of offenders, the violent criminal offenders?
No, so the basic premise, I don't think a lot of people are going to have a argument with it in terms of if you have indigent or people that don't have the money to bail themselves out or post bail, they should not be held in incarceration for offenses that are relatively minor. But you know, we're always just picking a little, you know, the best examples we can find. I'm guilty of it too. And so, but you have other cases, I'm sure, where these people should not be let out on bail. So we have to be very careful. That's what the judges are for. So I would feel more comfortable with the judge on an individual case making that decision than some universal settlement.
20 seconds.
I think both left and the right on last year have come together on bail reform and mass incarceration in our country because it's affecting our budgets. We are 5% of the world's population, but we jail 25% of the world's population. It's just unsustainable.
Okay, got to leave it there. Still ahead, our state's House Speaker facing outrage and potential prosecution. Will a controversial recording be the downfall of Dennis Bonnen? Plus, another mediation meltdown between firefighters and Houston's mayor. The fallout when we come back. Welcome back. Last week it was just a controversy. This week the allegations surrounding Texas House Speaker Dennis Bonnen have morphed into a full-blown crisis. At issue, a backroom meeting between Bonnen and conservative activist provocateur Michael Quinn Sullivan, during which the speaker allegedly offered House press credentials to writers working for Empower Texans in exchange for orchestrated political attacks against 10 Republican incumbents in the 2020 primaries. Some see that quid quo pro as an old-fashioned bribe offered illegally on state ground. This week, Bonnen's denials were stymied by the emergence of an audio recording of the meeting, which multiple Republicans have heard and say confirms Sullivan's account of events. Law enforcement agencies, including the Texas Rangers, are investigating. Bonnen has since called for the tape to be made public. Some are suggesting the speaker's days as speaker may be numbered. Bob Price has done a lot of reporting on this. Is Bonnen in trouble?
Bonnen better be careful what he asks for, because he just may get what he's asking for, and that would not be good for him, wouldn't be good for the Republican Party, and it's really not good for the Texas legislature. When I first read Michael's blog post on Texas Scorecard, as a journalist, it struck me that the tone of it, he was writing from a transcript of a tape. You know, it just was way too accurate, too detailed to just be going from recollection. And sure enough, you know, you got the denial from Bonnen, and then you got the rebuttal from Michael, and then you got the denial again. And all of it leads to the fact that there is a tape of this. I've talked to people who've listened to the tape, and many of those are Bonnen supporters who were stunned by it, and they say that the tape 100% accurately reflects what Michael Quinn Sullivan has said.
Charles Blaine, you worked with Empower Texans. You know, what's your read on this?
Yeah, so, you know, to reiterate something Bob said, I think it's really interesting. You know, we've heard State Representatives Jonathan Stickland and Steve Toth both said they heard it and kind of reiterated what Michael was saying. But even State Representative Travis Clardy, who Empower supported a primary opponent for, listened to the tape and is still saying that Michael is right. So I think there's a lot there, and I think we have to realize, you know, it's political, but there's a governance issue here. I mean, was the speaker using his office to offer, you know, press credentials to a journalist to, you know, cover something one way or to hurt primary opponents? So I think that's a big question. But the bigger question is, where has Bonnen been? We have not heard anything. I mean, it's been almost radio silence since the denial. I mean, I know there was talk about a press conference maybe Friday that ended up not happening, but where has he been? Where is Dustin Burrows, the other person who was in the meeting? Why has he been silent? Why is he taking Bonnen's lead and just not saying a word? And are they going to be effective going into the next legislature if they weather this storm? So I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and we're not getting anything from the legislature.
Ben Strusan, you're fully briefed on this.
Yeah, so there's 10 names on the list. And the thing that struck me initially was that there's no political ideology behind it. In other words, it's not all moderates, it's not conservatives, it's not the only thing I think they all have in common is that Bonnen doesn't like them, and which that makes it even worse. And Bonnen went to a great deal of trouble to try to get across the point a couple of months ago that he didn't want a lot of inter-party fighting, that we were worried about the Democrats in control of the House legislature, and he didn't want anybody helping out primary opponents. And then now he's apparently, in some fashion, and I have no idea how, because, yeah, he seems smarter than this, stumbled into this quagmire. The tape will get released. And again, I've only heard it third party, third hand, but there are other things on the tape, I think, that are equally as embarrassing for Dennis Bonnen, and he's going to find himself in a lot of hot water and a lot of pressure to resign. Let me just say one more thing. How this affects the election, donors have always funneled their money through the speaker and his PACs when it comes to House races. Strauss it beforehand, Craddock before that. So you have the business community that has been funneling money, and they've been raising money for this sole purpose of trying to retain Republican control over the state legislature. They're going to have a hard time trying to figure out what's going on with their money, and whether or not they want to continue to do it this way.
Well, let's talk about the political brass tacks. Does this help the Democratic campaign to get those 8 or 9 votes they need in the House?
Republican Richard Nixon had a problem with the tapes. President Trump had Access Hollywood tapes, and now Dennis Bonnen, the Speaker of the House, has tapes problem. So, look, the bigger issue that Republicans have is that they are losing across Texas, and you are seeing these resignations and retirements come in abundance because of that. On top of it, you just have failed leadership at every level in the Republican Party, starting from the President of the United States to the Speaker of the House in Texas.
Okay, we're going to move on. The festering wound of wage unfairness for Houston firefighters just won't heal. For the 3rd time in a matter of months, mediation between the city of Houston and the union collapsed. This time it was a quick death, lasting just a few hours before mediator Darrell Bristow declared there was no chance of agreement. The firefighters made their offer public: phase-in voter-approved pay parity with police over 5 years, with all future wage disputes settled by an independent arbiter. The mayor, facing a tough re-election battle, apparently rejected that deal. Multiple sources, including mayoral challenger Dwight Boykins, tell Fox 26 Turner and the city are seeking an agreement which would include privatizing EMS services, a move which would strip more than 1,000 firefighter jobs off the payroll. Mayoral spokesperson Mary Bitton says she is unaware of any new discussion of privatization, adding the option has been studied and considered by both the current and past administrations. Fire Chief Sam Pena tells Fox 26 flatly there is no plan or recommendation to privatize EMS. Charles Blaine, you cover City Hall. What's your read on this?
Yeah, so I mean, it's been really interesting. I think, first of all, privatization of some government services isn't a bad thing. But in this instance, I'm not supportive of it simply because they wanted the ballot box. And so what we're trying to do is figure out a happy medium where they can get their raises. And so the fact that now the city wants to kind of throw on, privatization and whatever else on top of it to give them what they want already, it's just dishonest. But I think the person who can solve this was at the top of that clip, and that's Fire Chief Sam Pena. He's been kind of the most measured voice in this entire situation. He hasn't gotten involved in the political aspect of it on either side, and I think that if we could remove the police union from the negotiation, because they shouldn't be involved in any way, and kind of get the mayor to back off a little bit and allow the fire chief and the union president to kind of hash this out themselves, we'd probably see some resolution sooner rather than later. I mean, this is just a nonstop fight, and it needs to be fixed.
Tony, this is not your favorite topic, but I mean, look, they've been fighting over this for months now, and doesn't look like either side. The firefighters offer this deal. The mayor says it's not a good deal for the city. We can't afford it. What's your take?
Well, I'm all for the unions. Power to the unions. I was actually in San Antonio when the AFL-CIO had their 60th Constitutional Convention. I really support the firefighters. The people voted for this. The mayor said they didn't have enough money. We entertained that thought. And then it seems to me the mayor proposed a 5-year plan. It looks like the fire union said we're up for the 5-year plan. Let's get back to the talking table. I'd love to see the mayor and the fire department come to terms on this, like you alluded to. I think they're close. Let's solve this sooner than later, because we want Houston to be safe. We want the firefighters to be praised, and we want everything to work.
Okay, the 14th Court of Appeals, watching this closely, they ordered the mediation for it to end in 4 or 5 hours. Mustafa, what's your take on all this?
Well, Dwight Boykins, who supports the firefighters, said that he would be open to a $25 user fee, which would be $300 a year for every household in Houston. I'm not for a $300 increase, because that's $100 million of what they're asking. So I'm glad that Mayor Turner is negotiating on behalf of Houstonians, because if it wasn't for Mayor Turner, we would see something like that.
Okay, Bob Price, you always like to jump in on this.
Well, I think there could be some politics at play here, in that the firefighters could be trying to run out the clock on the mayor to have this issue dealt with the next mayor of Houston.
Okay. Ben, what's your read?
Hey, the voters have spoken. It's up to Mayor Turner to implement the will of the voters. Let's get it done already, and if he doesn't, there'll be political consequences in November.
Mary, 10 seconds.
Definitely no on privatization.
Okay, leaving it there. Still ahead, our panel answers the question, what did we miss? So stay with us. Welcome back on this sad Sunday morning. We will close our discussion, as we always do, with an effort to fill in some informational gaps. With that, I pose the question, what did we miss, Ben Strusan?
Remember the Steele dossier paid for by the Clintons, Oppo Research? It's a Russian plant.
Wow, okay. Merrick?
This week, the Harris County Commissioner's Court approved a request by District Attorney Kim Ogg for 10 additional employees that will investigate the botched drug raid, and we're looking forward to seeing results from that.
Okay, Bob Price.
This week in Mexico, 3 journalists were murdered because of reporting news about cartels and political corruption down there. 10 people this year, 10 journalists this year, and 11 since the new president took office. Something's got to be done down there to protect the flow of information.
They are courageous journalists. They deserve that. MUSTAFA, TAMEEZ.
We're going to hear a lot about shootings this weekend, a lot. And just as we do, and you can hear a lot of political conversation. I think the most important thing that we should all remember is that 20 families plus in El Paso are going to have dinner without having somebody at the dinner table. You know, we make fun of this thoughts and prayers, but the thoughts and prayers are not just for those families, but for our nation as well.
Absolutely. Charles Blaine.
Yeah. In less than 2 weeks, we'll know if Houston ISD, the state's largest school district, the 7th largest in the nation, will be taken over by the state. They've had 106 out of 280 campuses at some point failing in the last 6 years. So we'll find out what's going to happen to those 200,000 plus students by August 15th.
I think you can bet the ranch on it. Tony Diaz.
I think especially in light of current events, we have to demand to be thought of and conveyed as intellectuals, as deep thinking people. We got 6 weeks before Hispanic Heritage Month. We need to demand art, culture, and history for Hispanic Heritage Month. Our voice needs to be out there. We shouldn't be intimidated. We're proud to be Americans. We've served this country. It's time that we get respected.
I'm proud Latinos are part of my country. Okay. That's all the time we have. Thanks to our team. And remember, keep it right here. Fox News Sunday with Chris Wallace is coming up at the top of the hour. And be sure and join us next week for the latest edition of What's Your Point?